All right, hi everybody, and welcome to the September 24th, 2019 edition of the Cluster API Provider Implementers Office Hours. Place to ask questions, talk about all sorts of things that don't require making a decision. That's what's going to happen. The main office hours happen on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Yeah, there's an agenda doc. Let me add that in the chat, just in case. If you want to add whatever topic you have on your mind, or add yourself to the attendees list, that would be great. But otherwise, yeah. What is on your mind?
I'll go first. So I've been working through, I'm basically moving the Talos provider. The V1 Alpha 1 Talos provider basically did a bunch of infrastructure provisioning and the user data creation, bootstrapping stuff, right? So I'm now moving towards V1 Alpha 2, and as part of that, basically moving to being purely a bootstrap provider. I think for the most part, I can get away with that. There's a few things that I've kind of been working through with the various infrastructure providers, and I've really only been looking at GCP just because it was, I don't know, for some reason the one I picked to start with. But anywho, I mean, I've got some issues with like just Talos being weird, I guess, in terms of like, it's not like the Kubernetes bootstrapper, I guess. And the general flow, I mean, for us is not that different from Kubernetes, and that, you know, we're basically generating some user data and passing it into the instance that gets created. Where it gets a little different is for us, you know, we're publishing an API for the operating system, right? So basically, I need to be able to serve up a port as well to say like, you know, okay, here's port 50,000 is kind of the one we use by default, but for these nodes, and you know, you can talk to them with a tool we have called OSCTL, right? Where I'm kind of getting into trouble, and I've been trying to figure out how to explain this, I guess, but where I've been getting into trouble is with the GCP provider. At least it seems like, you know, they create a load balancer, but it only proxies basically 443 to 6443, which works fine for kubeatom. But I'm trying to figure out if I need to add rules to that, or if I should start thinking about trying to do things in a different way. You know, it's more just thought and discussion around like, okay, well, say you want to publish another port on your control plane. How do you go about doing that, right? And that's really the general part of the question, probably. And so, I mean, I'm kind of going down a couple of different rabbit holes and trying to figure out where I'm, you know, what's the best way forward, and is it trying to figure out how to add ports to the load balancer, or is it doing something like pre-creating the network interfaces or the IPs for the control plane, or maybe giving GCP the ability to do that, I guess. And I'm trying to figure out, I guess, I'm trying to figure out where to start and how receptive you think like the various providers would be to something like that, right? So, I mean, if when I create the cluster resource, I go allocate 3 IPs for my control plane, and I push those into the cluster spec somewhere, right? Is that bad? It doesn't seem bad, but like it doesn't seem like it's maybe that useful for other people.
Yeah, because if you sort of want to pre-allocate some of the network resources,
right,
that will be associated with machines, then that you're sort of you're overriding some decisions maybe that aren't, at least today, aren't. Right. Nobody thinks of them as something that you know needs to be overridden. So I wanted to ask you a question. When you have a service, and that the service runs natively, and you need to expose it on a port, and then you have this client that will target the service.
Right.
When does that service need to be, or sorry, when does the client need to start talking to the service?
Before Kubernetes is up, and that's kind of the bit, right? Is because Talos and the way the OS is designed, and we don't have SSH, right? So we basically have a native endpoint that you can hit, and then it dumps out like the services and like the kubeatom logs in case kubeatom fails and things like that, right? So it's really there to think about it kind of like an out of band for the node itself, kind of, right? So it's totally divorced from Kubernetes, and it's kind of on its own. So it needs to be there early, and it needs to be there, without Kubernetes involved. Because otherwise, yeah, I mean, doing an ingress or a service there would be great, but.
Okay, and I'm writing this down on the agenda.
Sure.
It needs to be the service needs to be available before the cluster is up. Before, I mean, it sounds like it's prerequisite to actually bootstrapping the cluster.
And it's not necessarily a prerequisite to bootstrapping the cluster, I guess. Like, it's just, if something fails, you kind of need it there. You know what I mean? Like, if I couldn't hit it right away and the node was still booting up or whatever, that's fine. But if something were to fail, then I would have no idea why. And that's kind of, yeah. So, I mean,
okay.
Earlier the better kind of thing.
Okay, so let me actually fix that maybe in the agenda, or if you want to fix it.
Sure.
Also, doesn't need, but should be able to reach in order to let the user
use status of deployment or something. Yeah, something like that's fine. And so, yeah, I mean, I've kind of gone down, like I said, I mean, that was kind of one thing I thought about was if you could pre-create the IPs, then I could at least know those. And so I could get around having to have the load balancer kind of thing, you know what I mean? Or figuring out the load balancer. I don't think, from what I can tell, at least in Google, I'm not sure, at least, so we create a global load balancer right now in GCP. When you create the cluster resource and it associates that with an instance group, right? And I think, I'm not sure you can add multiple ports to that, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And so, which seems lame, but I mean, if there was a way to just add multiple ports to the load balancer, maybe that's not a horrible way to do it.
Question. So if your service is this a distributed service that is itself like are all these different on each node they're all talking to one another? Because if you're going through a load balancer,
Right.
you don't care where the request ends up?
We're working on that part, but yeah, the goal right now is, as we're redesigning things, is that the masters will be the points of entry for this API, and it will proxy those requests to the other nodes in the cluster as well.
Okay.
So I think that will work. Like, the load balancer seems like a fairly okay place to go with that. I just think, from what I can tell, like I said, I've got to do a little more research, but I'm not sure you can just add new ports to an existing load balancer. So I almost need another load balancer, I think. And it's like, well, that sucks, because I don't want to. Basically, what we're hoping to do, I guess, at the end of the day, is provide a really nice way to just manage and say, like, I want a Kubernetes cluster from here, right? Or in this, I want one in AWS based on Talos, right? Okay, cool. Go, and not have to pre-create anything, right? So asking the user to go pre-create a load balancer just for Talos' API seems, problematic to me, I guess, is where I'm at.
Right.
So I'm hoping either I can figure out a way to extend the existing load balancer or create a new load balancer using the proper provider. I don't know. I'm kind of just up in the air on like, man, I don't know where to go with this.
Okay. Sorry, I got to step away just for a second. I'll be right back.
No worries.
Sorry, I can't be of much help, Spencer. I'm kind of new to the whole cluster API thing.
Sure.
And I'm just attending all the meetings this week to see what each meeting is about.
Okay.
So I have some context.
Nice. Where do you work?
I work at Pivotal / soon to be VMware.
Gotcha. Cool. There's lots of VMware folks floating around, man. These guys are everywhere on this cluster API stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of why Pivotal's all like, oh, I guess we should put some people on it too.
Right. That's a good thing, man.
Cool. Anyways, I'll just be listening in. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I just had to step away for a second. So yeah, it sounds like there is you need to reach the service. So it sounds like there are two problems. And sorry if I know this is a little dense, but I'm just trying to, maybe I'm being a little dense, but I'm trying to break it down into problems. So it sounds like there are two problems. One is the just reachability problem, like how if there are ports blocked, whether that's load balancer or security groups, right? You need to get to the service. The other problem is a kind of a discovery problem, right? If you like that's what the load balancer is solving. So yeah, because if the load balancer endpoint is well defined, and the user just can talk to that and doesn't need to know about the individual hosts. Okay. So yeah, and today everything goes on that. There's that one port that's exposed, and there's not really anything that we can. Sorry, I've got a kid in the room.
It happens, man.
Okay. Yeah, reverse. I'm just like thinking things that are coming off the top of my head. Reverse, like a reverse proxy. That doesn't really work with the load balancer.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things that's like, imagine you need to open up a port on your control plane, regardless of it being Talos or not, right? Like, I want to have a port open on my masters, and I want to expose that port, right? And have it exposed from the get-go. So how does that work? It's not a Talos problem, kind of. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's easier to abstract it away that way. I don't know, but yeah.
No, that's true. I from what I know in AWS, that if you're using a classic ELB, you are able to expose as many TCP ports, I think, as you want.
And I mean, I may be wrong. I mean, I'd love to be wrong, but from what I've seen in the global load balancer that's created with GCP, I'm not sure that you can specify like multiple front ends and back ends. It seems like it gives you the option to, but from what I've been able to find, I can't find quite the right, I don't know, setup.
But even if it were possible, for instance, if you're doing this in AWS, it's possible, but then Kappa doesn't expose ports as something that you can specify as an end user. That extends actually to other properties, right? Security. There's a known issue where security groups today, so Kappa security groups are predefined for the Calico CNI. and specific ports that Calico needs. Now, if you want to use another CNI, you can deploy it. You can use no CNI if you want. That deploys as an add-on after the cluster's up. But the fact is that only Calico will work because of those security group rules.
Right.
So okay, so one issue is, or I guess not one issue, but if there wasn't a problem in GCP, let's just assume that there's no problem in GCP. Then it's really a matter of asking each. It would be a matter of asking, I guess, each provider to support this customization,
right?
Which is it's a bit of a pain,
right? And for us, at least historically, and with our first version of the provider, we were doing AWS, GCP, Azure, and Packet, right? And so I feel like I understand all of those enough to if there's customization that needs to be done, we'll dive in, we'll do it. It's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good point you brought up about the security groups, because I haven't been bitten by that yet, but I'm totally going to be. Because for the same reason, right? Because I'm going to need to expose that port on the security group as well, right? As well as on the load balancer. So that's interesting. Sure.
Oh, sorry.
No. That's, yeah.
So on the one hand, right, I said that, it's, even if there's no infrastructure, blocker, then you still end up having to, get this change in each infra provider, which is a pain. On the other hand, maybe that's really the best that we can hope for, because an infra provider is tightly coupled with the actual infra, and if the infra doesn't support it, then it doesn't really make sense to expose that as an option. But it would be good to I guess nail down this use case and make sure that providers are aware of it as soon as possible. Maybe start off in one provider, and then once that's working, socialize the solution or the approach with other providers.
Yeah, that's exactly where I've been, right? I kind of picked out the GCP one just because it seemed like Vince was working actively on it, and it was changing quick, and I had a few other little minor nits that we kind of fixed real fast. So it was like, okay, this is where I'm going to start, just because, for no real reason, but the fact that it's moving. So I picked that one up first, and just got kind of stuck. So yeah, that's kind of how I wound up here. But
are you saying you're stuck because of there's like the apparent infra blocker?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. And like I said, I need to probably explore it more. If I can add more ports to the load balancer, that's fine. That probably works, but I'll still need that exposed in the infra provider, right? And whether or not people think that's a great idea or not is one thing, I guess, and then we can talk about that. But yeah.
So, about the load balancer provider idea. Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I'll be able to find it right now. So the load balancer provider is something that Moshe has been talking about, and I think there is some interest in it for the next cycle. Hang on just one second. Let me see. Load balancer cluster API. Load balancer provider. Sorry, I'm just gonna try to find the issue. Okay, that's not. Okay. API repo. So what I'm wondering is so you mentioned, hey, okay, you could have a second load balancer. Maybe in terms of resource, like extra costs, there's no real,
Sure.
It is what it is, but it's a pain to burden the user with it, right? So if there was some way by which, you know, the Talos Bootstrap provider could actually get that from whatever infra provider there is, you know, maybe that would help. Of course, then you're going to have one part is creation, and the other part is just discovering what this load balancer is, right?
Right.
The convenience of the control plane load balancer is that the user knows what it is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, exactly. You know, I mean, it's certainly not, even if I had to get the user to pre-create the load balancer. Yeah. I mean, it's something they would have to probably pass in their manifest somehow as they created the cluster itself, which wouldn't be great either. But, yeah, I don't know. I'm really hoping that like we can basically figure out a way to just add ports to an existing load balancer and make that configurable. Like if I can do that with the GCP side, I think I can at least go argue that enough to other providers, right? To say like, this is why I need this, and please let's do this. Yeah. But yeah, I just was kind of wanting to talk through it, I guess, to make sure I'm not like, and make sure I was thinking about it the right way, I guess. You know, I mean, I thought about it like, wow, you know, I can wait till those machines are online, and then I can trigger a reconcile and try to figure out what my masters are. But that doesn't really buy me a whole lot, I don't think, just because, you know, I'm out of the bootstrap phase at that point, so I can't really, unless I have like a post task somehow. But you know, I don't really think I need that or want that. So
yeah.
And then I thought about like, well, what if, you know, what if we have to go down the road of having a Talos infra provider that just wraps all the other ones, and that seems awful. And like something I definitely don't want to do again. Or go.
Yeah, I mean that you know, that I think would be, that would be a signal to Cluster API that okay, we're not doing something right.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested in, yeah, like I said, I mean, I don't know, it's maybe just more research needed, I guess, because I keep coming back to this, but I need to read more about the load balancer in GCP. But regardless, take Kappa for example, I guess. If in a classic load balancer you can add ports willy-nilly and you can add whatever you want, that's still going to have to be configurable, right? From the Kappa provider side, I guess. So yes, I mean, maybe that's a place to start poking too, just to say like, let's go ahead and start talking about the fact that we're going to need this, right? And yeah, so that's a good point.
Yeah. What other so I'm just wondering, like by the way, Warren, if I don't know if you wanted to talk about anything else, I want to just make sure that we're not going to spend all the time on this one question. But if
nothing specific. I was just telling Spencer while you had to step out. I'm joining. I'm just new to the cluster API thing, and I want to contribute more. And I happen to manage to get myself in my at Pivotal in a spot where I can focus majority of my time contributing.
Okay.
So this week, I'm just kind of attending all the meetings I can to kind of gain context on what's the purpose of each meeting, and you know how each one flows. I'm just starting to like submit like look for issues and stuff, so very early on. But I might even drop off soon in some time because I have another meeting to attend.
Okay.
But I just wanted to jump in to see what this meeting was all about. But it's really nice that you'll have office hours. I'm very happy because I'm pretty sure I'm going to make good use of it eventually. Great.
Yeah. This is absolutely this is definitely the place, I think, for you know, for for questions and, sort of open-ended discussion. Because if you haven't been to the main meeting, which will take place tomorrow,
yep.
That's really for status, making like getting rough consensus on issues. It's more more getting down to business. I feel like this is more of an opportunity to just
this is great. Like just seeing you guys hash out a problem, like between you and Spencer. It's I'm very happy to see that, because I've just been overwhelmed. I'm just consuming information this week, and I'm just like, it feels out of place in a status meeting. It feels like a different path. But I'll definitely try and attend more, and hopefully in time be more useful to people who have questions.
Absolutely, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, always looking for hosts, etc. Anyway, but cool. Hopefully see you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you. I'll log off now, but thanks.
All right.
Yeah,
nice to meet you. Do you think, I was going to ask you, do you think it would be useful to think about the problem with like just assume, okay, there's no such thing as a load balancer. Now what do we do?
Right. Yeah, I think there probably is. So the way it works, so maybe it does help to talk a little bit about how it works inside of Talos, right? And the way that our old provider did it. So we basically, in the V1 Alpha 1 version, it basically, sorry, I got a text and got totally distracted. You would create your cluster resource, and you would say, here's my 3 IPs that I'm going to use for my masters or whatever, right? So we kind of said, you've got to know your masters ahead of time. And we would generate the user data that we generate a bunch of certs and stuff, and then, cram a bunch of user data together to say, here's my ones for my masters, and then here's my one for my workers, and push all those in the config maps. And what we also did was we create what we call a Talos config, which is basically like a kube config, right? That says, here's the certs for the client side stuff, and here's the IPs of, the master nodes or whatever we would, point to. So you kind of knew those IPs ahead of time, I guess, is what I'm getting at, right? And so if there's a way to know IPs ahead of time, period, that works too, right? But there's not really like you create the cluster from the GCP side. Again, that's the only one I've messed with so far. But on the GCP side, you create the cluster. It goes and creates the load balancer and an infrastructure or instance group, I think. And then you basically start booting machines. In the cluster spec, I think there's a way to say like, yes, I want public IPs, which is nice, but they don't get pre-created, right? So you still don't know them ahead of time. So yeah, that's kind of, it's, if there's not a load balancer, it's still a problem, kind of. You know what I mean? Like I still need to know those things outside of the bootstrapper reconciliation loop, I guess.
Yeah, this is interesting because as you're talking about it, it actually reminds me of the pre-existing machine use case where, okay, I've got a bunch of Linux boxes and I want to use cluster API to get a Kubernetes cluster up, right? So
let me double back because I had forgotten a pretty important piece. We did change it because we were like, well, it's super lame that the user has to say, here's my 3 IPs, right? So what we basically did was like we extended our provider to say, all right, when I create the cluster resource, I'm going to create a cluster. Here's, I want 3 control plane nodes in AWS. And that would go allocate those IPs. So we were doing like pre-allocation of the IPs or creating floating IPs or whatever, right? And then those were getting basically passed in at the machine layer. So the master 0 knew to pick up the first floating IP. So yeah, we were requiring people to pre-create those, and then we got away from that because that sucks, So, so we were trying to work around that, but again, that's at like the cluster resource level, getting those things created because we know we're going to need them when machines come online. So I don't know where that falls in like the flow of things and how how dirty of a hack that was, but
Yeah, because it's kind of interesting. So it sounds like do you need this information? Do you need the node to be initialized with with this, let's say, user
I think
data?
I lost you. I lost you on audio. Sorry. I don't know if it's you or me. Seems to be working now though. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
We're back.
All right. Do you need to initialize this user data as part of creating the machine? Is that how's this user data arrive?
So we were creating the user data. Basically, we knew the IPs that we needed, at least for the masters. So we said, let's create all this user data, cram it into a bunch of config maps, and then when the machines got created, we used that user data out of the config map and pushed it into the machine creation. So I don't think that part's radically different than, with what we have, at least currently in our V1 Alpha 2 provider, and trying to work that out. But yeah, it was just more a factor of we knew all the masters ahead of time.
I see.
So yeah, I don't know, man.
Well, no, so what I'm wondering is, so I think it's sorry, I got kind of lost. If you boot the machines and then you're able to push whatever configuration that that your components need after they're created, right? So on GCP, you create the machines, and then once you have the machines, they're booted, whatever, they have a network identity, they have an IP, then you push configuration to them. Is that a workflow? Is that a workflow that would possibly work?
We basically only, you can only configure the node. It's totally immutable. It only gets configured one time at boot through user data.
Got it.
And if there was a way, so to clarify a little more, I think this is specifically just around being able to generate that Talos config, kind of like a Qconfig, for an end user to interact with the nodes, right? So if there was a way to get in immediately after, and I just don't think there is, because I just don't think there is, but if there's a way to get in after the machines have been created, I would have all the info I needed, I think, right? But by that point, if I'm only a bootstrap provider, I think I'm screwed, kind of. Because that's only a machine scope, right, versus a cluster-wide scope, kind of thing.
I guess. So you want to be able to pass. You want to know the IPs of the machine so that you can pass them in, so that Talos is what will actually coordinate to bring up the cluster. Is that?
It's just that when let me try to think about the flow again, because it's been a minute since I looked at the V1 Alpha 2 stuff, because I've just been looking at infrastructure providers. But now I'm confusing myself. I think I'm talking in circles.
Yeah, I think maybe I don't understand exactly what Talos is trying to do, because like you just said something about after the machines are booted, that if you're a bootstrap provider, then you're not going to be able to do anything at the cluster level. I'm a little confused.
Sure.
What is the what is Talos supposed to be doing? What is Cluster API supposed to be doing?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, let's see. So the way it worked previously was cluster gets created, the cluster resource gets created. We say, here's the 3 IPs for the masters or whatever, right? So say we assume it works that way, or we've pre-created 3 IPs automatically. We then generate a bunch of user data. We store that in a bunch of config maps. And then we say, as part of generating that user data, we create a bunch of client certs too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we say, we also pushed into a config map, this Talos config that said, all right, here's your Talos config. It's got some client certs in it, and it's got an endpoint basically that points to master 0 by default for, whatever. We're kind of reworking some things inside of Talos, so that's why I'm kind of confusing myself, I think. But Talos itself now doesn't really need, like, I think as we have things, as we're working towards, we spent a bunch of time talking about this morning, but I think if what we're working towards works out, we don't need to necessarily have those IPs ahead of time for Talos as it comes online. We can probably get by with just the load balancer that's there. But for the users to check on their Talos nodes as they're coming up, and for us to be able to say, like, okay, here's your client certs and also an endpoint to hit to check on these nodes. Here's that, and we'll push into a config map or something, right? And I just don't have any IP to do that with, kind of, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like, I don't know any master IP. I don't know anything that exposes port 50,000.
I see. So if I understood it right, then it's really not about having that information for Talos. It's about having that information for somebody running OS Cuddle. Okay. So would so I think as the machines are created, right, the metadata in like the machine objects get updated, right? So machine, let's say I create a control plane machine. The instance is booted. It gets an IP. I think that that information appears in the machine object, regardless of whether the machine was able to successfully bootstrap or not, right? It might be totally totally broken, but the IP is there. Is that information, is that source of information something that you could use?
Maybe. And now that I'm talking it out a little more, I'm wondering if I need to understand more, just because I didn't write the logic for it, but on what our client certs look like. Like, if I just created those client certs and crammed those into a config map and said, okay, you pull that down and you say, all right, I want to target this node, manually, kind of, does that work? It might. So I might be okay. Except I can't get to port 50,000, I guess, in the security group at that point. But that I can work through.
Sorry, I think I missed the search part though. The search I mean, unless you're using some domain name, then you do need the IP, right, to put in the subject alt name.
Right, and so that's what I'm not quite sure I understand or not, right? So I'm not sure, I guess.
Yeah, so for a client to be able to authenticate the server, the client needs to trust the CA that signed the server cert, but at the same time, the server cert has to be, not has to be, but it's very common, right? That you use subject alt names, and if you don't, it's standard that a certificate, like a server certificate, would specify, right, that like this certificate is valid for this domain name or this IP, or or a collection of domain names and IP.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I think we might have just been using all the master IPs that we already had, right, as alt IP or whatever, right?
Yeah. So if you don't have those, then one thing that you could do is I guess do this with then you need some kind of indirection, right? So you have DNS or you could either have DNS or a load balancer.
We need a load balancer, I think, man. It seems like it just really feels that way. So I mean, all right. So I think I've got a couple of things to poke at. I mean, I think maybe I look at Kappa first a little bit and just see if, like, okay, well, if ELB already supports all this stuff and I can just kind of hack it into Kappa and see how quickly that turns around, and if it works, maybe that's a good way to go. And then I just need to do some research on GCP a little more. Okay. Yeah. No. I think that gives me a few directions to go. So I think
By the way, I don't know if you've been able to use capd, the Docker provider. I don't know if that's compatible or incompatible. I mean, I know it uses kind underneath, so you're really about modifying the images,
right?
But I get with capd, I found that you can experiment sort of more quickly.
We have something kind of similar, actually, where you can do a Docker-based Talus cluster. So I've been using that as my Bootstrap cluster, and then throwing all kinds of random controllers at it. So that works pretty well. I like that format for dev, for real. That's nice stuff. So
yeah. Okay.
Cool, man. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me bounce some ideas and stuff. And thanks.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Thanks.
All right.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.